I'll first start talking.
Oh, if you were there,
It's
then,
in the
yeah.
water source.
That was such a big splash of people.
Yeah, that was a lot.
And,
Welcome, everyone. My name is Lisa Silguero, co-organizer of the Mysterious Ancient Civilizations. And Dr. Barbara MacLeod was actually given to me or forwarded her information to by Smiles, which everybody knows here. I took over the group from a young man that had started it in February, and I thought it was a really interesting topic. And I had been looking for people to speak and hope to find a couple more. It's all about all the archaeological megaliths, civilizations, all that sort of stuff. Anything that has to do with archaeology or anthropology. So I'm hoping that I'll be able to continue this organization and have more speakers and do more fun stuff and smile.
Thank you, Lisa. So Lisa and I met at a previous event that was held here by the other nonprofit that I'm active in that also shares the space that we'll be showing you down in the hall at the end of this lecture. That space is cohabitated by my nonprofit, the Scientific Anomaly Institute, which is the 501c3 name for what we call the Anomaly Archives. And that is a lending library and archive devoted to the preservation of books and research materials focused on anomalous phenomena, any subject that science finds either too gauche or too strange or ill understood, or that they just think is not worth the time of day to look into. And so we archive and preserve a variety of materials dealing with everything from UFOs and consciousness, parapsychology, anomalous phenomena, ghosts, hauntings, psychopharmacology, and sundry other subjects. And we'll be having our grand reopening and relaunch party in the very near future, so stay tuned for that. In the meantime, I want to introduce our guest for tonight. It was a pleasure to work with Lisa in getting Barb MacLeod to our speaking engagement here. Met Barb through INAX, the Institute for Neuroscience and Consciousness Studies, that other nonprofit I was alluding to that we cohabitate the space down the hall with. And was fascinated by her stories of adventure in South and Central America and her skill at being a Maya linguist and also an active spelunker and also an aerobatic stunt pilot. So she is a person with many talents and stories, and I'm very much looking forward to hearing what she has to say about Maya shamanism today. So thank you, and we'll get started.
All righty. Is it possible to close the door? Thank you. If you don't mind, I'd like to make it nice and dark. As long as I can see what I'm doing here. Boy, and my eyes are gonna have to adapt. Let's find the up and down arrows. Oh, good luck. Nope, that's not the one. Here we go. Okay. All right, so the title of my talk, I think it will become self-evident once we get to the actual narrative itself. I call it the transmutation of sustenance, and it has to do with an ancient Mayan creation myth involving a process of conversion of one element into another, very alchemical process, and the medium by which it's done is metaphysical lightning. And we're going to be talking about how ancient Maya state practice, and I say state practice, this is the religion of the kings that we see displayed all over Maya cities, on Maya stelae, the standing stones and panels that are set up at the backs of rooms, and lots of small portable art. It's all tied into this whole idea that kings, Maya kings, inherited their right to be kings from an ancient charter involving direct negotiation with the gods. And the method was very shamanistic, and we'll see a lot of evidence of But let me first ask the group, because you're all pretty savvy about this stuff. Just say something a little bit about what you know about what shamans do. You know, just anything, because they do a lot of things.
Anyone?
Anyone.
Anyone speak up?
Interface with the other side to bring wisdom back to the tribe.
Yes. Okay.
To me, shamanism has always been a way of knowing how to be working in harmony with the unknown, with energies that Western Europeans might call spirit energies. And I first heard the word once from a psychology professor at the evening class at Hopkins when I lived in Baltimore. And I was describing what I did as an art therapist. He said, "Roberta, tell me what art therapy is." And I said that I had to speak with my hands, and I said, well, I have someone draw a picture, and then I try to get in harmony or in sync with their view of the world in order to help them transform whatever dysfunctional perceptions they have into perceptions that will help them live a better life. That was the way I described what I was doing at a psych hospital and in Baltimore. And he said to me, as I was using my hands to talk about tuning into someone else's reality, later I learned the word shape-shifting. And I in my readings that seems to be related, but he said, "Roberta, you talk like a shaman." And I said, "Really, what's that?" At which case he told me to read Michael Harner's book, The Way of the Shaman.
Okay.
So apparently it's people who know how to work with subtle and invisible, unknown things that are there and can be very powerful. I liked your phrase, the electric lightning. That's new to me. That seems to me to be some kind of working with energies.
Absolutely. We'll see more about it. And there's a whole lot more about it that I don't have time to talk about today, but we're going to see some of it. Anybody else? Anybody else have an idea? Because shamans do lots of things.
Well, yes, it's working with these unknown energies. They've become very familiar with them over the years about the way of manipulating materials with energies that we may know but call by a different name. I like the name, the electric energies that you're talking about may enter into this, because we know that we can, in science, you can take certain electrical energies and you can change one material into another kind of thing. And we know also about people who have psychic abilities, and they're able to manipulate materials to a certain degree. I haven't gone into that to any great depth. I just believe it's possible. And I think that all ties in here. There's so much we don't understand about this whole area here. It's very exciting and very interesting. And I think they're working with energies we already understand, but called by a different name and used for different purposes.
Yeah, I think that's very true. Very true.
I'm a retired NASA engineer, and also with long-term interest in electromagnetic field effects. And there's been so much. They even knew how to make batteries back well over several thousand years ago to fool people into getting ingots that were plated with gold rather than the real thing. And then they made them up, and he found the actual things that were several thousand years old. And we found things archaeologically for thousands of years that have been invented and worked with for a while and then forgotten, and other people found it. How the hell did they do this? And we're still out there in the Far East that they found, and nobody's figured out how the hell they built them. They can't, and they're 12,000 years old. They've run into the same situation in southern Japan, 60 feet underwater. There's all kinds of stuff that they're finding, and we're looking forward to hearing what else you've got. Maybe you can clarify some of the things anyway.
Well,
tell us more about it.
I'm not going to be talking about mysterious objects as far as I know, but I think that where I want to go with this is that, you know, a lot of people know something about the Maya, but I don't think very many people realize that the Maya religion, Maya political system was actually a kind of state shamanism.
State shamanism.
State shamanism.
No separation of church and state.
None whatsoever. So I'm going to start out with just a quote from the Popol Vuh. Some of you may have heard about the Popol Vuh. It's a sacred book of the Quiche Maya, and it has a lot of different sections, but I'm going to give you a piece from the creation section. I'm just going to read it to you, because it's a little bit of a preamble to where we're going to go. It's called The Creation of the Earth. This is a translation from the Quiche language. Then came his word, heart of sky, arrived here with sovereign and Quetzal serpent in the darkness, in the night. He spoke with sovereign and Quetzal serpent. They talked together then. They thought and they pondered. They reached an accord, bringing together their words and their thoughts. Then they gave birth, heartening one another. Beneath the light, they gave birth to humanity. Then they arranged for the germination and creation of the trees and the bushes, the germination of all life and creation. For the darkness, in the darkness and in the night, by heart of sky, who was called Huracan. And that's not the Spanish word for hurricane. Actually, it's the Quiche word for 1 foot. First is thunderbolt, Huracan. Second is youngest thunderbolt. And third is sudden thunderbolt. These three together are heart of sky. Then they came together with sovereign and Quetzal serpent. Together they conceived light and life. How shall it be sown? When shall there be a dawn for anyone? Who shall be a provider? Who shall be a sustainer? Then be it so, you are conceived. May the water be taken away, emptied out, so that the plate of the earth may be created. May it be gathered and become level. Then may it be sown. Then may dawn the sky. Then may dawn the sky and the earth. There can be no worship, no reverence given by what we have framed and what we have shaped until humanity has been created, until people have been made, they said. Then the earth was created by them. Merely their word brought about the creation of it. In order to create the earth, they said, earth. And immediately it was created, just like a cloud, like a mist, was the creation and formation of it. Then they called forth for the mountains, they called forth the mountains from the water. Straightway the great mountains came to be. It was merely their spirit essence, their miraculous power that brought about the conception of the mountains and the valleys. Straightway were created cypress groves and pine forests to cover the face of the earth. Now this story came from the highlands of Guatemala, but the lowland version of it would have had high canopy rainforest. Thus Quetzal serpent rejoiced. It is good that you have come, heart of sky, you, Huracan, and you as well, youngest thunderbolt and sudden thunderbolt. That which we have framed and shaped shall turn out well, they said. All right, so a lot of you know where the Maya were located, where it are, but just a quick image of maps that show where they are.
Is that in focus?
If it isn't, I don't know how to make it more in focus. And we don't need to see the details. It's probably not just good resolution. But this is the general area where the Maya are located, Yucatan Peninsula down into Belize. This is the whole country of Guatemala, down into El Salvador and Honduras. And there's actually a pocket of Mayan speakers up here in Veracruz called the Huastecs. And this is what the topography looks like. I don't know why we picked up this.
I think if you just click outside of it.
Click outside, there it goes. Just to see, this is all the lowlands. This is high canopy rainforest, well, low canopy in this area because it's much drier. This whole central area's high canopy rainforest gets up to 70 or more inches of rain a year, sometimes 100. And this is the Guatemalan highlands, this is a couple who came from this area here. And so there's quite a contrast in terms of the geography, terrain, and rainfall of the Maya area. But these people were all united in sharing a common culture and closely related languages. All the Mayan languages are now about as far apart as English and German, but we know that we have a common ancestor. All right, and just,
But,
you know,
folks,
yes,
I had a question. Is that a lake? A high lake in the lower left part of it?
Right here?
Is that the, yeah, are
yes,
those,
Lake Atitlan, Lago Atitlan.
That's the face of
Lago
the-
Izabal here, and then Lake Petén here. Yeah, Lake Atitlan right here.
isn't that a very important lake?
Oh, absolutely. Surrounded by volcanoes, and it has some people, the Tsutuhil and Kachikel groups who still practice a very traditional religion. This is also a very popular tourist area too, Panajachel, Santiago Atitlan.
And is that the San Andreas Fault where that mountain range is? It seems-
San Andreas Fault just runs along the coast of California.
Yeah, but it goes all the way through just to South America. So
Yeah,
I wonder
but
if
that
that's,
would, I think that would still be a lot further west, doesn't it? I mean,
it'd be
we're
in
pretty-
the sea here.
We're pretty far east. I mean, there's
Maybe-
Pacific, but, you know, California is gonna be up,
Well, yeah, but it goes all the way down to the Andes.
does it?
It may have a different name, but it's the same fault line.
Uh-huh.
I think so, the Andes.
Because that puts them very close to the edge of a tectonic plate there, I think.
Oh, well, the edge of the tectonic plate is where the mountains are.
Yes, that's what I wondered.
That's
So
it,
that's
you
the
know,
San Andreas
that whole
Fault.
Pacific Rim. Yeah, it's all surrounded by major faults. I don't know if it's called the San Andreas Fault down there, but it certainly is.
But it is the same fault line, yeah.
And it's, you know, hot spots, a
Yeah.
lot of volcanic activity. The Volcán de Fuego just recently erupted last spring.
Yeah, that
Okay.
makes a lot of difference in the subtle energy of the region.
Absolutely. I just want to show you some images of Maya temples for those who aren't familiar with them. I can't tarry long on some of this is preliminary stuff, but I just want to show you some images, some of which is familiar, the site of Tikal in Guatemala, big, tall, beautiful temples, sanctuaries with
Kind of like what you see in Asia, some places there.
they're similar, but I don't think related. And this, of course, from the Star Wars movie. You know, the Rebel base was based at Tikal.
Fabulous slides, Barbara.
Well, thank you. We're just getting started. Some more images of Maya temples. And this is from the city of Palenque, which is
Palenque.
very, very beautiful place. My favorite Maya site. Just gorgeous buildings. And then I'll just show you some art. In this case, specifically, this is a male and female who are bloodletting. They're pulling she is pulling a thorny rope through her tongue, and he is kind of carefully, not quite in view, perforating his penis.
Really?
Perforating his penis, yeah, that's the bloodletter he's got in his hand, right there.
I wonder how that's related to circumcision.
I think historically, or mythically, or symbolically, they're very closely related. It's the idea of letting blood from the penis as a means of male fertility. It's acknowledging the male component in the process of life. All right, so I'm just showing you some images of what I say. These are reflections of what I say is state shamanism. That the rulers were obliged to make offerings of their own blood. That was absolutely essential. It's one of the roles of kings. Again, here is the queen of the city of Yaxchilan pulling a thorny rope through her tongue while her husband holds this flaming torch. And the result of that event is that here she is in another scene, but it's a sequence. She's conjuring a serpent, and out of the open mouth of the serpent comes an ancestor.
What is that thing he's holding in his hand? Looks like a wand.
It's a spear. It's a spear and a shield.
Is that a fire torch also?
This is a fire torch, and this is just a spear. I don't know why this thing is jumping ahead, but here, I'm trying to be delicate about it, backtrack a bit. No, he's wearing warrior garb, because in this process of conjuring ancestors, you're also feeding the ancestors, and part of it was the obligation to conduct war. This is the whole blood sacrifice complex. But just to point out that blood sacrifice is a fundamental part of Maya state shamanism. And it's also a fundamental part of Native American traditions. Not all of them, but you think about the Sundance of the Lakota. I say this to be absolutely continuous with that. It's giving of oneself. The only thing that God does not possess is one's own flesh and blood. And that's the only true gift you can give when you want to make an offering.
Wow, that's an amazing type of theology.
They're really good at time too, I understand, keeping time very accurately.
Well, we've got, their calendar is a whole other story. I wasn't going to say a whole lot about it, but and Maya stele, the freestanding stones, of which, this is a beautiful example. And here you see what he's holding in his hand. We're going to talk about a little bit later, but he's holding what's called a serpent's bar. This is a kind of a static form of the conjured serpent. Conjuring the serpent out of whose maw comes the ancestor or the god. This is the fundamental means of interfacing with the other world. And this serpent, as I will display, is zoomorphic personified lightning.
Wow.
Okay, this is an old image, or an image of an archaeological excavation at Copan, probably back in the early part of the 20th century. There's someone standing next to that monument. You see how tall he is versus.
Yes.
And then here's me. This is this past June, standing next to one of these tall monuments at the site of Jaguar. I'm leaning that way to counterbalance this one, which is I'm leaning right, or actually I'm leaning left from my own point of view.
The Leaning Tower of Maya.
Yeah, so, oops, it keeps jumping, but let me proceed. Just quickly, some more images of stele, just so you see what they are. They often have an image of the king with all his ritual regalia on some major period ending of the calendar, and they're almost always holding this serpent bar. This is emblematic of his role as a state shaman, a conjurer. He's a conjurer.
Were there staffs in the shape of a snake? Did it have a?
There were sometimes as well.
Because that relates to the Moses story, that Moses threw down his staff before Pharaoh and the snakes withered up. The snakes appeared when Moses. There
are staffs, but most of what I'm going to show you is related specifically to the emblem of the image of the conjuring, and using the serpent as a means of conjuring. And here again, images of Maya statecraft where bloodletting is required. I mean, this is the ancestor. This is the deceased king who's handing a blood letter to his son. And his son is on the other side. He's being handed a blood letter by his father, and he's being handed this particular kind of wrap by this rat. This is a very ornate and very special rat. And this object is a penis wrapper to collect the blood. After the perforation is made, then this thing is wrapped around it so that the maximum amount of blood can be collected, and it's going to be burned in a bloodletting bowl for a conjuring ritual. This is essential to the whole practice of Maya statecraft. And here's another image of the rat. The rat on the other side has also got one of these penis wrappers. And then that little text right there basically is the rat speaking. It says, here, take this thing and wrap it around the perforation in your dickie. That's what he's actually saying. All right, this is an example of a Maya altar showing the whole dynasty of Copan, showing the founder of the dynasty meeting the last member of the dynasty, with all of the members surrounding this monument. So a lot of what statecraft was perpetuating the royal bloodline and the things that they had to do, the interactions they had to engage with the gods, in order to make the proper offerings and perpetuate the royal bloodline. And what this story that I've not yet reached, the story that I will be telling you is about perpetuating the royal bloodline. All right, just images of the murals of Bonampak. This is a facsimile, not the original. But just amazing court scenes, very, very complex and rich court scenes. And then these are scenes of battle, and battle was an absolutely essential part of this whole process of statecraft. The battle scene itself, and then the interrogation and sacrifice of the prisoners right here. And then, as a lot of you know, the Maya produced very long and elaborate hieroglyphic texts, and I've spent the last 40 years of my life learning how to read this stuff. And I'm grateful that I actually had the opportunity to be exposed to it and get good mentoring, because to me it's been quite a privilege to actually be able to become literate in the Mayan script.
Great.
And just some examples, you know, very detailed, you can see very lengthy and detailed hieroglyphic texts. And this is the famous Forahau 3 Kankin date, which fell in December of 2012. This is the monument itself, photograph of it. This is where the piece was located on the original. Most of this survives. This was pieced together by people who knew collectors. These photographs or these pieces are not all, they've never been, not since classic times, all been in the same place. But the photographs allow you to piece together what the original was. And so this is the 2012 date, and it was carved in the 7th century.
So this is the 12-12-12 prophecy, the core of the Mayan shift?
Well, this is December 21st, 2012.
Okay. 12-21-12.
12/21.
2021.
Right, exactly. This is the date. And again, I don't want to linger on that topic because I've got other directions to go. Just some examples of this is the stuff that I'm currently working on. I'm writing a book on this cave art right here. The cave was first came to light in 1980. Was published in National Geographic, and some of you might have seen that volume. And then these are some images from the cave. You can see some pretty amazing stuff here that you would not see on public art. Images of individuals engaged in ritual practice, and I think this is a ritual. These are two males engaged in a fertilization or fertility ritual. And I can't spend a lot of time talking about that cave, but I could perhaps do another talk another time. And I'm currently finishing up a book on the art from this cave.
Yes.
So here's some other examples of it, just to see what's going on. Some amazing stuff in this cave, very esoteric stuff. Ceramic incensarios. These are actually stands for the actual bowl that would hold the coals. But these are images of the old fire god, or the Jaguar god of the underworld. So we're going to start meeting some of these underworld denizens and their representations on incensarios, or incense burners. And these are just these are tiny little vessels. You know, you could hold each of these in the palm of your hand, and these contain psychotropic drugs, some of which might contain tobacco or been mixed with tobacco, but I'm convinced they probably had other things as well. We'll talk more about those. And this is a very interesting object found in this cave that I'm writing a book about. And if anyone can figure out how it was used, I'd like to know. It's got a little bowl here, and then this little thing here, and this little tube connects one to the other, and then there's this thing that has a little nozzle at the end. And I, at this point, don't know how it was used, or have no idea what might have been mixed together. This is an image of the maize god. The maize god is the central god of the Maya, and it's a fundamental archetype that's found all over ancient Europe. It's the fundamental archetype from which the Christ myth arises. It's the dying god of vegetation who is reborn, and it's the same story. This is why it's. I wish that Carl Jung were still alive to know what we know about this story now, because he was absolutely right on And here it is, you know, in the New World in great detail. So we know a lot about it, and again, this is something, just mentioning it as an example of the kinds of ceramics we are going to be talking about. And we're not necessarily talking about this story, but I want to point out this jar. This jar actually has the symbol for darkness on it. And we're going to be seeing more of those darkness jars. Just some examples of Maya monochrome or bichrome or polychrome pottery, just so you can see how beautiful this stuff is. These are drinking cups. They're not flower bases. These are drinking cups. And a lot of these have been found in tombs, unfortunately looted tombs, so they're inconvenienced. They end up in private collections, but more and more the private collectors have come around to realizing that they can help to give back, perhaps to compensate for the fact that they bought an inconvenienced piece by allowing their pieces to be photographed and have their images then consolidated into a database that's available for scholars who want to work with this material. So I'm very grateful that these images are available. We're going to be looking at a lot of what are called rollout photographs. This is an example of a rollout photograph right here, where you see this is the original.
Oh,
this is
yeah.
what it looks like, and then there's a special kind of camera that's mounted in such a way that it swings as the vase turns on a turntable and takes a photograph of the whole scene. So we're going to be looking at quite a few of these. All right, here's another example of a rollout photograph, just to get you kind of in the groove with rollouts. And again, more examples of this beautiful, beautiful pottery with wonderful art and hieroglyphic texts and images of underworld denizens. These creatures, these are sort of mythical sustenance creatures. And we're going to be talking about sustenance, how the Maya viewed the metaphysical aspects of sustenance, and how essential it was to propitiate the gods, to give the gods what they wanted, to get sustenance in return. And sustenance comes in every imaginable form. I mean, you can think that the most obvious would be life-giving rain, so that the crops will grow, to provide the basic staples of corn, beans, and squash. But it's also sustenance in the form of the survival and robust continuation of the dynasty. It's a continuation of life itself. And so the primordial form of sustenance was underwater. It's what I call the fish god, or formally the Mayans call it the Piscean jester god. And it's not really a jester in the sense that we think of the court jester, but it comes in a form of a diadem that sits on the king's turban on it. All right, and some of the bases are dynastic. They have histories of the whole dynasty. And then here, these are some scenes of vomiting. So vomiting is an important part of this story. And they're kind of going in the direction of drugs that they were taking to enter trance states that required purging. But here are some scenes. You can see this fellow right here is barfing, and this little Jaguar is barfing, and this guy right here is barfing. And he's holding this little object in his hand that is, we now know is an enema syringe. So he has taken an enema that causes him to vomit. And then this person right here, you see being held, his head is being held, he's being supported by a woman standing behind him as he barfs into the hands of this old goddess right here. These are both forms of the moon goddess.
Moon, M-O-O?
Yeah, the moon goddess.
So it's a night ritual?
Not necessarily, but it's set in the other world. You know, these are probably humans right here, but these are all gods, and these are, you know, it's set in the primordial world, the world of the unconscious, or the world of the other side. Images of enema taking. Here, when you see this scene of a woman standing behind a male and sort of shielding his nether region with her robe, it's definitely an enema ritual. This is how they represented it. And then here it's much more explicit. You see, this woman is holding the enema syringe and administering it right there. And then this becomes even more explicit right here. And these little figurines, I mean, look at the look on this guy's face right here, as he is administering a psychotropic enema to himself. All right, and then onward of the theme of infant sacrifice. Sorry about the jumping ahead here. Infant sacrifice. This is actually an infant who is turning into a jaguar. This is part of our main theme here. And this is another example of an infant who is starting to turn into a jaguar. His arms, or his paws, his hands and his feet have become paws of a jaguar. And we'll be talking more about this image in a little bit. And in fact, in caves in particular, we found a lot of evidence of infant sacrifice. I worked in Belize I spent 5 years working for the archaeology department of Belize, excavating and exploring and mapping caves, and we found a lot of evidence of infant sacrifice in caves. These are infant bones. This is a part of the skull, and this is a rib of an infant, probably less than a year old. And this is a pool, still filled with water, but adjacent to it was another room that had been filled with water, which had drained, and they apparently had been putting these babies in this cave into these pools of water. And this pool probably has many skeletons of infants, but we were in no position to actually excavate or get, dive into it or explore the bottom. But certainly this is an area where we worked. We worked in this cave for about 5 months.
Barbara,
Yes.
has anyone put forth the theory, because shamanism and medicine man are often very close, that the bodies of those babies there may have been an effort to save sick babies? Do they know if any of the skeletons were deformed or unusual? That there was an effort of the medicine man to, because the exercising of demons, illness seen as demons, I wonder if anyone's put forth that theory.
Well, we know shamans do that. I mean, curing and healing is a major role of shamans, though my take on this is that it was probably not the major role of high-ranking kings and courtiers, but rather that practice would have been carried out in ancient times by local shamans in small communities, because the tradition had many levels. There was the state level, and then there was the level at the community where hands-on curing and healing also went on. But as far as images like this, I seriously doubt that this has anything to do with attempting to cure babies of illness. I think these are sacrifices. And we're going to see a lot of evidence of that as we move on. Okay, this image right here is actually of a heart sacrifice scene. These others are images of auto-sacrifice involving specifically penis perforation and dancing. This fellow here has perforated his penis, pulled this piece of cloth through it, which is now soaked with his blood, and he dances and whirls around, spreading blood everywhere. You can see here that this guy is dripping this blood falling from his perforated penis. Here's and they're engaged in a dance. There was always music involved and dance, and this was an obligation not only of the king but also high-ranking people in the court. And then this image here is quite explicit. This fellow here is, you can see, if I could blow it up, but I'm not quite sure how to do that, you can see that he's actually shown perforating his penis right there. So this, again, this is a very common practice for high-ranking individuals in Maya courts. Just more images from Maya pottery before we get into the actual story of how they conceived sustenance. The original sustenance was from the sea or from rivers. And we're going back into Olmec times for this myth and these images. The Olmec were somewhat agrarian, but not anywhere near as much as the Maya, and they lived in very swampy areas with lots of rivers, and they lived along the coasts. So fish and marine life were seen as the original forms of sustenance, and we know this to be true, for, kind of the evolution of societies, that the early people tended to be hunter-gatherers, and that they lived on the coast, that marine life, fish in particular, was a major staple for them. All right, moving on. Oh, this thing won't move now. What's going on?
You know, the goddess of creation in a lot of early tribal people was the goddess of the sea. And it's interesting
Makes a
here,
lot
I'm
of
only
sense.
hearing of gods, but they see is life coming from the sea. I wonder if they have any kind of deity for the sea. Because traditionally the deities for the sea are feminine. I haven't heard you mention a goddess
No,
among them.
there is not yet that I know of. Right now, Miles, this thing is frozen up. See if we can't get out back in. Yeah, that should allow us to get back. We're gonna get back to scroll. Keep scrolling and I'll tell you where we are. Stop right. Don't go up. Okay. Okay. Excuse me, this is where we stop. So go back to that slide. And then just go back to the slideshow. Activate that slide. Well, we're on that slide. This is it.
I was at a presentation at Texas State once, and he was the archivist from Harvard Historical
All right, well, I'll just do
Library.
this real quick. That's okay.
And his entire lecture was on slides. And he was, well, he was
Oh,
using
that's it.
photographic images
All right.
to talk about historic archives, and they couldn't get the slides to show. So he had to speak about slides. The creation myth, what I love to study.
All right, so here we are finally on the main topic. And this is it's a narrative which is represented on about 30 Maya vases. They've been mostly found, all from tombs as far as I know, and mostly voodoo tombs, unfortunately, and recovered from private collections. There's one photographer in New York named Justin Kerr. He's a good friend of mine. When he was younger, he used to travel a lot, photographing people's collections, but sometimes people would come. A lot of these people are very wealthy. They would just come to New York and bring their vessels, or he would travel quite often and photograph their collections and carry his camera equipment around with him. But he's now got something like 9,000 photographs, rollout photographs.
Wow.
Of Maya vases in private collections. And it's all online, it's all free. Anyone who wants to just contact me by email and I'll give you the link to it, and you can spend days roaming through rollout photographs of Maya vases. So these are the kind of the two acts of the play. The two separate scenes, but they're absolutely tied together. And one I call the story of the Snake Lady. She's a goddess. She's actually a form of the moon goddess. And she conjures this amazing serpent who she wraps around her. And you remember earlier we saw an image of a woman, a high-ranking woman, conjuring a serpent out of a burning bowl, a bowl containing bark paper that's been saturated in her own blood. And that's the state level of this. This is what I would call the chthonic level. This is the unconscious or hidden covert driver of the state practice. And the story we're seeing here is that story, is that myth that gives credence to justifies, is in fact the charter for state practice. So we're going to see the two acts of this play. One is this goddess. She's very buxom, very beautiful, and she conjures this serpent. And if you look carefully, you see the serpent, in fact, is the foot of this little god over here. This little god over here is called Kawil. Kawil means lightning. And you remember back when we read the bit from the Popol Vuh, we talked about the word huracan, which you might think is the Spanish word, if you know Spanish, for hurricane, because in fact it is. That's how you say hurricane in Spanish. I think that's an accident. That word actually comes from Taino, I think, you know, one of the Arawakan-speaking people from Haiti and Dominican Republic peoples. And it is a word for hurricane. But this word, huracan, in Quiche, means one is his foot. And this is the god. He's the embodiment of lightning. He has a fiery torch in his forehead, and one of his feet becomes the serpent, and out of the open maw of the serpent comes this old god. And this old god is the primordial shaman of the universe. The other story involves, you can't really see it very well, but the scene is set on the top of a mountain that is being split open by the rain god. And we'll see more details of this. It's split open by the rain god, who holds an axe in his hand, and out of his open mouth comes a lightning bolt. And he's holding in his other hand this thing we call a knuckle duster. It's a big heavy stone. So he's kind of got a basher in one hand and an axe in the other hand, splitting open the mountain. And over here we have the death god. And if you can see, if you look carefully, you see that there's a little infant right here, upside down in the hands of the death god. And this infant is in the process of turning into a baby jaguar. His little feet are turning into jaguar paws. And his eyes are surrounded by the classic rings, what we call the cruller eye of the jaguar god here. So it's an infant sacrifice, but this is set in primordial time. Just again to remind you that the state symbolism, the stuff that you see on Maya monuments comes straight out of this original source. Conjuring the serpent, that's what's going on in our story, and that's what's going on at the state level. Where the queen of Yaxchilan conjures the ancestor out of a bowl which contains the bark paper with her own blood.
Barbara, the intricacy of these ceramics is incredible.
Yes.
What is the date of this? I'm curious.
Most of this stuff comes from, I would say, there's a range, but most of this particular story we're going to be seeing comes from the early 8th century.
So the 700s.
700s, yeah. Some of maybe a little earlier.
By the European calendar or the Christian calendar,
Yes.
it's the 700s.
Right.
And what is it in the Mayan calendar? Do you know? Is it their creation story?
Well, the story itself is their creation story, but if you think about when it takes place, I mean, the creation of the Maya calendar, the 0 day of the Maya calendar goes back to 3114 BC.
3114.
3114 BC. I think that this story, the reason I showed you a section from the Popol Vuh at the beginning, that the Popol Vuh is only a remnant of what we call the great Maya monomyth. It was shared across the whole Maya area and probably shared before them by the Olmec, because the Aztecs picked up pieces of it. We see imagery from the Olmec culture that also participates in it, exactly.
Yeah,
And that's what that big head is the
yeah,
Olmec.
in front of the archaeology.
That this story is a creation story, and it is a piece of what we see left in the Popol Vuh. The Popol Vuh is incomplete. It's a remnant. And what I think that we're going to be seeing today, this is what the story is about the snake lady and the baby jaguar, is a piece of that creation story having to do with when the mountains were created and when the animals were created and when the waters were created. That whole, this is the detail, this is the kind of the corollary of that story. It's the other chapter of that particular period in the history of creation.
So when this visual documentation embodies the creation, does the language come at the same time, or does it come later? Do these pictures come first, and then the lettering and the writing come later?
Well, this is a story, it's an ancient creation story that goes back to before,
Before
3000
recorded
BC.
anything, yeah.
But it's being told in the 8th century.
Okay.
And of course, at that point, the language is completely represented in the hieroglyphic script. And the hieroglyphic script is not a pictographic script. It is a fully grammatical script.
And it comes later or with these illustrations?
Well, they travel together, and right here's an example of it right here. These are hieroglyphs right here. They're telling a bit of the story of what's going on in this image. And we're going to see, as we get into the ceramic part of the story, that there are going to be hieroglyphs associated with it that tell what's going on in those scenes as well. So the language at that time is full-bodied, fully grammatical, and the texts that we see, that we will see, are like captions to the scenes. But I just want to return to the concept of the serpent bar because it's so fundamental to kingship. A king cannot be a king, cannot be represented as a king without the serpent bar. But here's an example of a male holding a serpent bar from one of these pottery scenes. And it's rather unusual for males in the ceramic scenes to be holding the serpent bar. And when males hold it, it's rigid. You can see that the snake comes out of both ends of it. But when the female holds it, it's completely fluid. It wraps around her and sometimes passes through her. The female has the most intimate relationship with this object. And this object is zoomorphic lightning. So just remember that. And then, in this image here with the male holding this rigid tube out of which comes the serpent, that now has translated into a kind of a more formalized or more static and fossilized level, wherein the king now holds this double-headed serpent, or a tube, which we call the serpent bar, out of which comes either deities or ancestors, depending on what that particular story is. And then I'm just kind of giving you some of the basic elements of the story as we get ready to dive into it. This thing right here, this is a fish. And it sits on, it's kind of a diadem affixed to the top of this headdress that we call kind of the drum major headdress, because it looks like that. But it's a war headdress. And it's this primordial fish is representing the primordial source of sustenance that comes straight out of the Olmec culture. Because before agriculture, the marine life and the creatures of the sea and the rivers were the primordial and fundamental source of sustenance. Okay. And the word was seen, and I don't want to get too much into the linguistics of this, but I feel as though I've made an absolute case for that translation.
It's going to be a good book.
Well, this material is actually in press now in another book. It's a chapter. But this is another object that we're going to be seeing. I call it the darkness jar. It's often inverted, not always, but it's got the symbol for darkness on it. And a lot of people speculated about, well, what's in there? That symbol for darkness is associated with parentage. We'll see a couple of examples of the term chab-akab, which means creation darkness. And chab-akab is a way of talking about parentage. And in that context, either the father or the mother can be creation darkness. Or sometimes it's set up that one will be the mother and one will be the father, but the two are absolutely necessary to engender. And so this is probably the deepest and most esoteric concept in Maya iconography that we know of. The idea of creation darkness being the source of engendering.
Engendering.
Engendering, exactly.
How do you define engendering here?
Giving birth, creating offspring.
Giving birth, okay.
Creating offspring. The seed of conception. The seed of conception. All right, so here again, we've got these same two images. The snake lady here, she's conjured this wonderful serpent. The old god comes out, and you're going to see that it's very erotic. The old god definitely wants to mate with her. You know, she gives birth to him, and now he wants to mate with her. It's very ancestral, and they seem to have no problem with that. And at the other end of the serpent is a wheel, lightning, whose foot becomes the serpent.
That's
And-
homosexual, that's not ancestral. Isn't it, between the sexes?
Oh, well, she's given birth to him, so he's her son. And now he's mating with her.
Okay.
And, you know, you don't necessarily see that right here, but we will. We'll see it more, you know, more obviously displayed. And I don't want to linger on it. It's not even all that important, but it is a piece of the story. And I think that it's the element there is telling us that this particular, the rituals that recreate this myth, and you're wondering, well, why did they display this stuff on pottery that goes into tombs? Well, before it went into tombs, it was painted on pottery that they used in rituals. And they used in feasts, and some of those feasts involved everybody drinking psychotropic substances and sharing a common vision and recreating this myth. And this myth is basically the charter for how humans should relate to gods. That if you want sustenance, and remember, sustenance comes in multiple forms, all of it vital to human survival and survival of the dynasty. It's the rains, it's the crops, it's the fertility of the crops, it's the fertility of the lineage, all of that. And blood sacrifice was a fundamental piece of the story. So down here in this story, the blood sacrifice is a sacrifice of the baby, a human infant, who now transforms into a jaguar as he's being thrown into the mountain by the death god. And these days, these two texts, because when we read the hieroglyphic texts, these two dates are just 7 days apart. So they're not simultaneous, but they're 7 days apart. So they're sort of two acts of a play that extends out over a period of 7 days. And 7 is one of the magic numbers, one of the ritual numbers from the Maya. Another example of it, here's the Conjuring snake lady. It's a beautiful example of a wheel whose foot becomes the serpent. And now you see the old god looking all the more lecherous and reaching for her. And now we start seeing these bundled babies. And these bundled babies are an intrinsic part of the story, because what they are is, in fact, this little bundled baby is a baby tree. His head is the symbol for tree, for te. He becomes the tree that rises out of the mountain at the time of the sacrifice. There's another bundled baby that we'll see that is the baby rain god. We haven't seen him yet, but we will. Here's the tree starting to rise out of the mountain. And this, in fact, is a symbolic mountain. The mountain itself is alive. It has all kinds of living extrusions. Here's the baby falling into the mountain here. Kind of the whole scene is all set in one scene here. Death god throwing baby jaguar into the mountain. Rain god has just cracked open the mountain with his axe. And then here we're starting to see what they say about it. It actually reads, Yada Kawil, he throws the baby jaguar. So we're getting a caption that tells you what's going on. These are the main protagonists that we'll see again and again. The death god, the baby jaguar, the tree, and Cha, the rain god. In this case, the jaguar is actually a full jaguar and an adult. So there's this exchange between the infant jaguar and the adult jaguar. This is jaguar god beyond the world. But here the same scene, the death god right here. This actually is the extrusion that will become of the serpent that comes out of the mountain. And trust me, this is a mountain. This is an iconographic representation of the word wheats, which means mountain in almost all Mayan languages. And this is the rain god who's just split open the mountain. You see he's got his knuckle duster and his axe. You'll see lots of images of him. See, we've just seen that one. Here's some images of Kawil. These are some really beautiful renditions of Kawil. This is what he looks like. He's got a torch, a flaming torch coming out of his head, and his foot is a serpent. And he's sometimes held as a scepter. So people asked about staffs. This is one of the representations of lightning staffs that kings would often hold. It wasn't necessarily a tall stand-up staff. It was what we called a mannequin scepter. And so his name in Quiche from the Popol Vuh, Hu Rakan, one is foot. All right, another example. You're gonna get very familiar with these. Here's the rain god whacking the mountain open. Here's the death god throwing the poor little baby. Here's the baby down here being thrown in.
Is that color or suggest a rainbow?
What I've done, I've color-coded the glyphs. This is the date. That's the date in the Maya calendar. This is the verb, yalao, it means throw. And this is the name of the baby jaguar. And as we get a little further on, you'll see that the baby jaguar and the old god that come out of the snake have the same name. So again, the full scene, you can see the tree rising out of the mountain, the snake wrapped around the tree. And this, when we get into sort of the universal themes, the tree is the axis mundi. The tree is the same tree that we see in all the old world mythology. It's the tree of life, or the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, and the tree of life in the center of the Garden of Eden. This is the axis mundi. So you see the whole Maya archetypal constellation matches perfectly. It's just, as I say, I just wish you were alive today to know about this.
Well, he led us to it in a way. His
He
focus
certainly
on
did.
grace and myths.
Absolutely. I mean, I owe him a great debt.
The validity of the creation mythology and its importance in our primal archetypal psyche.
Well, to have it validated by a New World culture
That's amazing.
that had very little, if it had any contact at all with the old world, it would have been ancient contact, circumpolar contact way back when, not so much currently at all. All right, and this is a vase. There aren't any rollouts of this vase. This is in a private collection, and a friend of mine took these photographs, but I just want to show you some examples of this myth on this beautiful, beautiful vase. This is the hieroglyphic text, and it reads, the Maya is Hukpulsin Yashkan, Yalau Kawil Chak, Yasha al Chak. The baby jaguar, the first snake, he throws Kawil, the great. There's one undeciphered sign here. The rest of it I've figured out. One undeciphered sign left. I've got some ideas about it, but I'm not prepared to publish them. But it's just a beautiful example of the whole story. But you can see there's the rain god right there, there's the death god right there, and here's the baby jaguar falling into the mountain. And here's again, this is the one I showed you right at the beginning, with lightning coming out of his mouth. That's the rain god. You see the lightning bolt right there coming out of his mouth?
The detail in this is incredible in the storytelling. The detail for the storytelling is remarkable.
Well, it is a remarkable story. I've been working hard on this stuff for about 10 years, and I finally got my first publication.
Well, I'm commenting on the detail, the craftsmanship.
But absolutely, no, the craftsmanship is
It's
astonishing.
phenomenal.
It is, in general,
They're like ink drawings.
the craftsmanship of Maya vases is astonishing.
It's
absolutely as remarkable as anything the Greeks ever produced. It's just that it's a lot more recent that this stuff has come to light. So again, another example of baby jaguar, you see going to the mountain, death god, he always looks kind of fiendish, like he's cackling. And the lightning coming out of the open mouth with the rain god with his axe and his knuckle duster right there, and a jaguar looking on, and a vulture looking on over here. So often there's some underworld denizens that are participating in this.
Barbara, again,
Yes.
with these artifacts, like you were the first one to translate one of the early steles that helped be a breakthrough with my remembrance. With Ann Beaver's Dorf talks about that. Talks about your skills. I'm wondering if you were the first one with these cups. These cups tell stories and parables and the mythology of the religion, the way the stained glass windows of the cathedrals told the parables and the stories of the old Bible in the stained glass windows. This is simply a totally different form of craftsmanship, an incredible form of craftsmanship that tells the mythological stories. Because the majority of the populace in Europe, it's known, didn't read and write. Just, again, the royal families, the scribes, the priests.
Mm-hmm. In this case, I just want to say that the populace probably didn't have access to these objects.
It was just the...
Just the elite. These were produced for elite use.
Mm-hmm.
And they were used in rituals and in feasting, and then they went into royal tombs.
But weren't they seen as the guardians of the people and the leaders of the people?
Well, they were, of course, but I'm talking about these particular scenes.
I got it,
These
yeah.
particular scenes were not visible publicly. The things that were visible publicly is the state level. You know, those panels that I showed earlier, or the steeling. But that is the same story. That's kind of the upper story of this whole myth.
Mm-hmm.
This is the driver, this is the understory which drives it, which gives it validity.
Mm-hmm.
And so what the public saw was what was carved on the monuments.
Mm-hmm.
But it is the same story. All right. Again, another example of it. Again, you're going to start to think, I know this part of the story already. You've seen it all, right? Rain god, death god, big jaguar falling into the mountain. But they're giving us captions. And yes, I'm the first person that has completely translated these texts on this basis. Other people have made efforts at it. Some of these elements here have been known for a long time from other contexts. You know, they're syllabic spellings in the hieroglyphic script, so I didn't necessarily first crack those syllables. But as far as putting it all together and making sense of it grammatically, and translating the mysterious name that names both the baby jaguar and the old god, yeah, that's my work.
Wow.
Okay, here
What
is
is
the
the
baby
meaning?
jaguar
What
in
is-
his
What is the
jaguar.
meaning
Yes.
of the jaguar?
I'm sorry?
What is the meaning of the jaguar?
The jaguar is, well, it's seen as the most powerful animal in the forest, and also the most powerful sort of nawal or alter ego totem animal. I don't think totem is really the right word, but the Maya were definitely, one of the aspects of Maya shamanism involves shape-shifting. And involves having a companion animal who is born when you're born, and who is there present with you throughout your life. And you may at times actually become that animal. And I think they felt that maybe everyone potentially had a companion animal, but certainly the elite did. And they had the capacity of having, they had that the attributes of that animal within themselves. And particularly the jaguar was seen as the most powerful predator. The kind of the king of the forest.
It roamed their forests, yeah.
Um,
I did have a relationship with him somehow, so, or her.
Yeah, I mean, I personally feel very strongly affiliated with another big cat, the cougar, or the puma, which is also found in the rainforest. But this is the baby jaguar. This is, I think what they're saying is that because infants were the most precious form of offering, you know, and we have to kind of get our minds around the fact that the Maya were in many ways a bloody culture. They engaged in human sacrifice. Infants were commonly sacrificed, particularly in propitiation of the rain gods. And I've got plenty of evidence of it from caves firsthand. that you want to say they're justifying it. There is a charter that supports sacrifice of infants, who then are transformed. That sacrifice, I mean, the sacrifice, the word itself means to make sacred. It's not just something you throw away. You're creating sacredness that didn't exist before in the process of making this offering.
Sacred bucket.
And in this case, it involves a transformation of this baby into something magical. And the process by which it happens is orchestrated by, facilitated by the conduit of lightning, Kawi. And we haven't yet gotten to the snake lady scenes, we're about to. But now we're gonna, when we do, you're going to see who the baby jaguar turns into. So he, at the moment of his death, becomes the sacrificial jaguar. And these attributes, what the arrows are pointing at, are what we call the cruller on the eye of the baby. It's like these two rings around the eye.
Cruller.
Yeah, it's kind of, you know, a cruller like the pastry, but it's like these rings around the eye that meet in the middle. You can kind of see it here. I can't really blow it up. No, I don't know how to blow it up here. But
Well, the focus on the eye, those who can see in many dimensions, we'd say today, see differently, that's very common in the.
that's quite possible.
Yeah,
That's
sure.
definitely an attribute of the jaguar god of the underworld. But he's also a god of war and blood sacrifice. But you see that the baby, who's mostly human, has now got a tail right here. So that's often the first thing that happens in the transformation. And on the tip of the tail is the flaming torch that you see on the forehead of Kawil. That's telling you that this baby is now infused with lightning. This is the process by which it's the alchemy of transformation. You infuse the sacrifice with Kawil so that it can turn into the old god. All right, we're going to move on right now to the other act of the play. And here we have the snake lady who's wound the serpent around herself, and out of whose maw comes the old god. Now he's really close to her. And now we see the two bundled babies on the dais. One is Tet, tree, and the other is Chak, the rain god. And as I understand this story, and from having looked at all of these examples and studying these texts, she is now giving birth to three individuals. She's giving birth to the old god, she's giving birth to the baby rain god, and she's giving birth to the baby tree. And these are the same deities, these are the same entities who then in maturity become the rain god who splits open the mountain and the tree that rises out of it. It's a myth which is self-propagating. It's like a play in two acts, but neither act really comes first. It's yin and yang. Your enantiodromia is what it is. You know, each evolves into the other.
And antiodromia is I learned from Jung. That's an
Yes,
amazing
that's
concept.
a Jungian word, exactly. Well, that's what this is. This is a perfect example of Maya enantiodromia.
The life cycle, the death rebirth.
Well, it's the cycle of man's relationship to God, to gods, to nature. It's the only way that man can survive is by engaging in this cycle of reciprocity. It's reciprocity is the word. All right, so here again, this is the old god coming out of the serpent. There's the snake lady. I'm starting to highlight the skirt that she wears because we're going to talk more about that. The skirt is actually a leaf. And you may wonder, well, what is it a leaf of? What plant is this? And I do have some ideas. Here we have some other offerings. This is a bowl of bones, and this is a human head. So we're starting to see a little more imagery of blood sacrifice. And here is, this is Tet, the tree, and this is Chak, the rain god, in their infant form. They've just been born. So again, she gives birth to the old god coming out of the snake, and she gives birth to these two infants. And here we are again. There's a leaf skirt, and there's a Kawil, and there's this interesting kind of dialogue going on between the old god and Kawil. It's almost as though it's a threesome. and a menage a trois. There's they both want her. You can see if you look at Kawil, he's kind of got this little "come here, baby" kind of gesture. And look at the old god; he's looking a little bit, like ticked off about this. Like, no, she's mine. It's and you see this in a number of these scenes. There's this kind of sexual play that's going on between the Kawil, who is the serpent, right? Kawil, the serpent, is his foot, out of whose mouth comes the old god. All right, again, look at him. Look how lecherous he looks. And now she's looking over there, looking at Kawil, and the old god saying, no, you can't do it. And here we get the birth cliff. The old god is being born. His name is Hukpulsi. The baby Jaguar's name was Hukpulsi. Now, I may have translated that further back, but I haven't really stressed it yet. But we're going to be talking very shortly about what it means. The old god is named Hukpulsi. The baby Jaguar is named Hukpulsi. And this old god, by the way, this is the most ancient god of the whole pantheon. And we used to call him just God N because we didn't know his name, but now we know what his name is. When he's not in the snake, he is called Itzam, which means sorcerer. He is a primordial sorcerer. And he's associated with all kinds of elementals. He can turn into all kinds of things. Here he's totally fused with a snake. He can also become a mountain. He can be a turtle. He can be a toad. And he can also be a celestial god. He's sort of omnipresent. He's the primordial sorcerer and transformer, shapeshifter. This is a nice story that tells what the actual relationships are between these. I'll just read the translation. Is born the old god first snake, the mom of the turtle. Mom means grandfather, ancestor. Something wind, we don't know, is a bit missing there, undeciphered. Toadstone Lord, these are his names. These are the names of the old god. He is her child. She who conjures the winder snake, she of the conjuring chamber. Those are the only names we get for her. The way that we know, or the way that I know that she's a moon goddess, is that there are other versions of this story from other cities. All of these vessels we're looking at all basically come from one city and its satellite cities. But there are other cities in the Maya area that have other versions of the story. It's not so complete, but in those cases, it's more obvious that she's the moon goddess. So I think she is here. They just don't actually tell us. They don't have to tell us because these people that painted this, the people that see this, they know this story.
Well, in the oldest creation myths, she is related to the moon. The goddess of the sea is related to the moon and the moon cycles. Mm-hmm. And when I first looked up her name, first thing that came was for Yima Ya, was as the moon is related to the cycles and the changes and the shifts. And is the reflection of, the night is the reflection of the day, the moon is the reflection of the sun. So that's where you get the inclusive full picture.
Absolutely. Yeah, no, that's beautifully said, Roberta. That's absolutely true. All right. This is the rare example of a male on the basis. It's from the same tradition, from the same city, who's conjuring a serpent. But when he does it, he has to be holding this tube. He can't just deal directly with the snake. She's got a more direct relationship with the snake. But he's conjuring the same guy. Here's Kawil coming out of one end, and here's the old god coming out of the other end. And he's got the same name, Hukpulsi Yashkan. Yashkan means first snake. And Hukpulsi, I'll be translating in a moment. Okay, and here's another scene where she's conjuring the serpent. And now we get a little more detail about this set of infants. We don't actually see the baby rain god here. We just see the baby tree. We didn't have room to paint the baby rain god, but they named him here. And his name is Shakes Water Earth. He's the rain god who shakes the water and earth. Because when he hurls his lightning bolts, because he's the source of light. He's the storm god. He's the rain god. He hurls his lightning bolts. He strikes the earth with his axe. It shakes the water. It shakes the earth. And so he has that name. And here he's just about to mate with her. Very close to her right there. And another example of the rain god being called shakes water and earth. And now you see both babies here. Here's the rain god baby and here's the tree baby. And you wonder, well, who's this guy? Who's this guy? Well, let me suggest, because I've got an arrow pointing at him. This is the only human in the scene. And this is a fascinating way that the Maya bring the current, the contemporaneous Maya into these scenes, as they are showing you an example of a witness.
Yeah, that's what I thought.
This is a witness. This is a human witness. He's probably drunk. He's drunk the potion in order to participate, in order to see this vision. He's drunk the potion. Look at the expression on his face. He's saying, "Oh, wow."
Is he restrained with ropes?
No, I don't think so. That's just a scarf tied around his head. No, he's not restrained.
No, around his arms? And
No,
his
those are just wristlets. You know, he's got a belt and he's got wristlets, but no, he's not restrained. When they depict ropes, they make it obvious that they're ropes. Ropes will actually show the braiding or the coiling of the rope. Now, he's not a captive. This is someone who has. This is an acolyte of this tradition of conjuring, who's taken one of these substances, and we're going to see more evidence of that. And now he's having a vision of the two infants, and he's looking a little bit shocked.
So he's in a psychotropic trance,
He is witnessing the rest of this.
seeing this vision.
That's what I think is going on.
Yeah.
So just to get back to there are a lot of other representations of the relationship between the moon goddess and the old god. This is one. And she's always represented as, well, in her youthful form, she's represented as a beautiful young woman, and he, of course, is this crotchety old curmudgeon. But they're actively involved in an embrace, and they are essential. I mean, she's the moon goddess, and he's the primordial sorcerer. He's the first god. It's a fundamental couple. This is an unusual plate that represents the same story, but here's the snake lady who's conjured the serpent. Here's the old god coming out of the open mouth of the serpent. Kawil is over here. And look right there, do you see the hole in the middle of that plate?
An actual hole?
No, it's not natural. It was often when ceramics were placed in tombs, they would be ritually killed. They would punch a small hole in the side. But in this case, they punched it right in the eye of the old god. And there's a lot of debate about what this means. Are they trying to somehow terminate the power of this object? Or are they putting it into the other world? I think they're putting it into the other world because they want it to continue to have its power in the tomb. They're not just consigning the whole tomb and its contents to the trash bin.
So it's sort of a sacrifice itself.
Exactly. It's a sacrifice of this vase or this plate or this object in order to make sacred something that was not previously. I think it's basically now sending it off to the other world. And here we see an incensario. We didn't see very many of those yet. But there's an incensario, and it's actually got, you can't see it very well, but trust me, it's a motif of a human heart with a dagger or a knife stuck into it.
And down at the bottom of that plate, what was that? A
Oh,
witness?
down here, oh yes, thanks for mentioning that. It's a young male sacrifice. He's been chopped up, he's been dismembered.
Oh,
He's cut open, his chest is cut open, and it looks like his arm has been cut off.
so that could be his heart given up into the
Very likely, that's
sacrificial.
his heart in that incensario. So in this case, he doesn't look like an infant. He'd be, kind of a young child, but not an infant.
in the book about Maya, this tree grows out of hell. I read it when you were giving lectures in 2012 to try to understand more. What I understood was that if people were sacrificed, they believed they were becoming holy. They were believing they sacrificed willingly to support their people and to become divine themselves. Am I remembering it correctly?
I would say that they did believe that they would become holy. I don't know to what extent they went willingly.
To what extent they?
I don't know to what extent they went willingly.
Oh.
I hold some skepticism
That's
about
a big
how
question.
willing they were.
Mhm.
And I think that, we can apply that to our own situation. We all know that we have to cross that event horizon. We have some ideas about what might be there, but we're not in a hurry to go. And I don't think they were either. Even though they may have believed, I think it's likely they did. That they were assured a special place in the afterlife by being sacrificed. And certainly, the whole concept of sacrifice, to get back to the Jungian theme, the whole concept of sacrifice is one of those holiest of holies.
Yes, it is.
It has huge, huge archetypal potency. And people are drawn to it. There's no question that people are drawn to it. And you can be swallowed up by it. You can be at the point where you might feel like you want to go with it.
Well, that's the theory about Joan of Arc. Is she became a saint because she was willing. I mean, she didn't want to die, but and there are a lot of writings that say that when these people were burned at the stake or they were dunked in the water or whatever, they had given themselves over to a divine spirit. They'd given up the earthly domain to move beyond. That was, maybe it was not by choice, but that was the way to deal with the fact that they were facing death.
And it would make, if you could pull it off, if you know that your sacrificial death, you're burning at the stake, whatever is inevitable, that if you could somehow make the most of it, make it as sacred as it can be and step into that transition to already be halfway there, so much the better. Yeah, I agree completely. There's no question, it's a hugely potent archetype. It's a strong attractor. It's a great attractor. And I think for these people it was as well. All right, so here's the guy. This god right here is a form of the death god. He's kind of the transitory death god, or the transitional death god, who receives the infant from the Lord who donates it. And the question would be, well, where do these infants come from? Do they come from the Lord's own family? I wouldn't rule that out, but I'd be inclined to say that they don't come from the Lord's own family. They come from some lower stratum household, or they come from an enemy village that was conquered or attacked, and the captives taken from that village of all ages, taken back for different purposes. Some would become slaves and some would become sacrifices. And that'd be my guess. That's where these infants come from. But at the point that the infant is received by this guy, we know what his name is, Akan. At the point that Akan receives the guy is the point at which he starts becoming the baby, becomes the baby jaguar. So he's not yet being thrown into the mountain. But metaphysically, he's now on his way. And you see it represented not only on the ceramics, again for very private use, but also this is an altar at Tikal for public viewing. So that same god right there with that tall hat engaged in some sort of secondary burial ritual. He was definitely known to the populace and part of the state practice. Okay, and here we're back to this scene, and look at these guys. Who do you think they are? We know that the infants, we know who they are, right? Who are they?
The tree.
The tree and the baby tree and the baby who?
Rain god.
The baby rain god, exactly. There they are. Now they're decked out in jaguar belts. And here we have the baby, the human infant that's turning into a jaguar. Unfortunately, this face is somewhat damaged. And that bowl that he's in sits on top of a censer, an incensario that's flaming. But over here we have what I think are the two humans in the scene. And look at them. They're totally snoppered. They're totally entranced. They're musicians. Their instruments are sitting up here on the shelf. Obviously, earlier in the act, they were playing this turtle shell drum and this probably a log drum with a Jaguar pedal. And now they're kind of into the midst of their variación, as they call it in an ayahuasca ceremony. You get to a point where you're not very inclined to do anything other than just, sail away in the dream. You can't do anything. You're completely ensnared. You're taken. You're there. He's wearing a vomit bib. Look at that. That we know from a lot of other scenes is a vomit bib. I forgot to point it out when I showed you images of vomit back there. But it was kind of a woven cloth thing that they would wear when they knew they were going to take a substance that would cause them to purge. So these guys are, they're definitely under the influence of some psychotropic substance.
Did you see Leanne Venier's presentation on her 2 weeks in the ayahuasca retreat?
This was a while ago, wasn't it? Like a couple years ago?
I would love to see the two of you
I did see that.
talk together, because she talked about the vomiting and what they had to go through, and there were two men from England who couldn't take the whole 2 weeks and they just left. But she felt that she made a major breakthrough and barrier in her consciousness.
Well, ayahuasca is a hard ride. It really is. It's a hard ride. For those of you familiar with it, it's rough. There's a huge body load with it. And it's not just the purging, it's like the rest of it. It really is a hard ride. Even though you recover quickly, when you recover, you feel pretty good. It doesn't drag on for days. But when you're in the midst of it, you're taken away somewhere. You have to surrender to it, and it's a hard thing to surrender to at times.
Have you done it, Barbara?
I have, yeah. I've taken ayahuasca, probably drunk ayahuasca 6 times, and they're all memorable. I have my detailed journal about it. It's just full of amazement. But again, for me, as I think I was saying earlier to Joe, I see ayahuasca in my own life as being kind of the next step beyond all the other psychedelics that I've done. And I see them all as part of a continuation, that it's not as though ayahuasca is all by itself as the only way to get there. It's not at all. I mean, other psychedelics are absolutely capable of taking you to profound, deep, mystical experiences. And I've been fortunate to have some of those earlier experiences with LSD, mushrooms, and mescaline. Peyote was my first drug ever before I even smoked pot. Peyote just, opened up the whole other door of the universe to me. So I see them all as being kind of part of the same journey. But the nice thing about ayahuasca is it's still embedded in its traditional culture. I mean, peyote can be too, depending. If you have access to the Native American church, if you are able to sit in on those ceremonies and become a participant, not just occasionally, but to actually be involved in the culture, then you have that same kind of complete being embedded in a tradition. But most of us that encounter psychedelics in urban America get it, pretty divorced from its original source. Some people were able to go to Oaxaca and eat mushrooms with Maria Sabina, but that's harder to do now because that whole town in Wildlife Jimenez has been kind of split. It's been messed up by mushroom tourism. Anyway, onward. But so here I say these are the humans in the scene right here, and they're entranced. And one of them is wearing a vomit bib. Maybe they both are. You can't see this one's front.
Maybe they're the parents of the baby.
I doubt it. I truly doubt it. I mean, of course you don't know, but I doubt it. I think the baby was probably taken from raid, some wartime raid. And the people who are engaged in this process, these are elites. You know, these are young lords, lords in training who are being indoctrinated or initiated into this whole practice. No, I don't think they're likely to be related to. All right, just the same image I showed you earlier of the heart motif. You can't see it too well here, but you see it a little bit better right here. It's a human heart with a knife stuck into it. The knife has quetzal feathers attached. And here you see it. This is again on a monument for public display. It's the same motif. This guy here, this young guy, has been, and you can see ropes on his wrists and ankles. It's been stretched over an altar and his chest cut open. And then here you see this motif of the heart wrapped in this, like wrapped in cloth with this knife stuck into it, quetzal feather. So it's the same image. Oops. Oh, we jumped ahead here. Let me jump back. All right. All right, to just touch briefly on this idea of chalk being the one who shakes the water in the earth. There's lots of images of the baby chalk as well as the adult chalk. And we get this hieroglyphic phrase that tells us this is the chalk who shakes the water and shakes the earth. And here I wanted to show you side by side the baby chalk and the baby tree together with the adult chalk and the adult tree. Here's the adult tree right here, the adult tree right here, and again, this is the axis mundi. This is the center of the cosmos. And just not so we don't forget, this is a creation myth. This took place back in 3113 BC or thereabouts. Story, or maybe before. You know, 3114 BC is actually that's the 0 date of the Maya calendar. But there are hieroglyphic texts which go back to before then. They actually go back to quite a ways before then. So in the same way that our 0 AD point is not the beginning of all creation. It's just where our Gregorian calendar kicks off. We know there's a lot going on.
Well, there, 3113, is that 30,000 years?
3,000. 3114. 3,000 years.
Oh,
3,114 years BC. But when you correlate our calendar with the Maya calendar, that's where we get to the 0 date. Okay, so the tree and the rain god in infancy and maturity. All right, and again another name for this conjuring goddess, Ishtsaka Kopim Sak Ishwaya, lady conjurer of the winder, white something. We don't know how to read this thing. It looks kind of feline, but not really, you know. So it's I don't want to claim we know how to read it. But she's the lady conjurer of the winder, lady of the spirits, and that's one of the ways that she's referred to. We don't actually get her true name. We just get she's described kind of by what her role is. And here again is another human in a trance state, in the midst of the vision of this event. All right, so let's look a little more at these guys. I put a bunch of them together. These are the humans, some of the humans involved in these scenes, and I think they're all in trance. They're all mareadas. They're all in a psychotropic state, deep trance. And that when you look at the scenes in which they are embedded, the curtains are spotted like jaguars, or they're striped or zigzag like snakes. That the message here is that as with psychedelics, we take them, the geometry that we see with our eyes closed is then superimposed upon everything around us when our eyes are open. I think we're getting that message right here. All right, now we're getting into the nitty-gritty of what they call this serpent. So when I give you this phrase, shining, flashing, drink snake, what do you think of? Well,
I see things coming out of a snake's mouth.
oh, Okay? What is being drunk, do you suppose, and what's shining and flashing?
Would it be the psychotropic?
I think, again, and this is where I say we're getting pretty close to the ayahuasca tradition specifically, as I do now think that the Maya had a version of it. That ayahuasca traditionally, and it's certainly true from my experience, produces visions of jeweled, coiled serpents coiling around you and embedded with jewels, are just brilliant with flashing lights. And in the background, again, speaking for my own ayahuasca stuff, kind of as the backdrop to this moving jeweled serpent is lightning. It's this brilliant flashing whiteness that is just, it's like you're looking at the Big Bang. That's my take on it. You're looking at the Big Bang. You're being taken back to the very beginning of creation. And it's got that brilliant flashing white quality to it. So here it is. I mean, here we're being told directly. The name of this serpent, Lem Uk Khan. Shining, flashing drink snake. And if you look at the snake, this particular one's just got one little flashing things on it, and I've kind of highlighted it with my own little green stars. But that original, that's a little like burst of lightning. And here again is another one of our, entranced humans participating in this. And look at the old god coming out of the snake now holding a cup. He's offering her a cup. Of course, she's the source of it all. But it's kind of like, again, in the ayahuasca tradition, there is a goddess who is the kind of the embodiment of ayahuasca, and she's called La Madre, the mother, La Madre. La Madre. And it's a very profound female experience for a lot of people with ayahuasca, and they call her La Madre Ayahuasca. And I think this woman, the moon goddess, in this context, is functioning in that same way, that she is the deified female version of the plant. So the question now is, well, what plant? And we'll get there. All right, so look at this snake. This snake is just totally bedecked with these sparklings. Not just one, but I don't know how many there are. It's probably a dozen if you look at the whole thing. And here we see that phrase, the shining, flashing drink creature. It's not clearly a snake in this case, it's this thing. So there's this aspect of the snake that may actually refer to the old god himself, because we don't see the snake. This old guy can turn up in scenes where the snake isn't present. But here, look at what else is here. We've got a hieroglyphic text that names him. It's right here. It says, arrives at the Khan house, the Star Lord. He's the Star Lord. First something person. We don't have every glyph translated. The shining, flashing drink creature. His person is his creation and darkness. Remember those terms, creation and darkness? Chab akab. These are the two elements that permit procreation. And the scene right here, the scene, I'll get back to it. There's a lord who's probably about to partake or has partaken. He's being accompanied by the court dwarf. And in between them, the old god is offering this jug of stuff. And look, the jug itself is a female. It's the female personification of its contents. So I say this is a female plant spirit in that jar. And here we have another example of the same kind of, here we see the snake, the old god's coming out of the snake. Then here's a basin, and I wish that I could read this sign. This sign is a hand sign. It reads kab, which can also be a rebus for the word for a brew. So it's a brew of something, but the sign behind it is undeciphered and it's unique. Here's the old god coming out of the snake, and here's the guy who now at this point obviously has drunk, because look, he's floating up off the ground. So outside of the context of our story, we're seeing plenty of evidence of the old god being a purveyor of psychotropic potions.
So this is considered to be the desired divine experience.
I think so, absolutely. We see it in the state art as well. You're going to see a little more of it.
This is the union with the divine.
Well, this is the vehicle which provides it for the in the right context and for the right people. So here's again the old god holding the cup. Here he is associated with the basin. And the title here is cups, basins, jars, basins, and clysters. Now clysters, that's a word for an enema syringe. But there's also scenes where he's holding a clyster. And we saw earlier scenes from the more public art of clysters being used to take enemas. And people have experimented with ayahuasca. People have actually taken ayahuasca via enema. I have not, but people do occasionally do that.
What is their experience?
Well, the same thing. It's absorbed through the intestinal tract. Probably a little bit less of the nausea, but I think it still makes you purge. What you avoid by taking it as an enema is the taste. And the taste, as Joe can probably assert.
Is it awful? Have you taken some?
Yeah, it's pretty
Oh, you
awful.
just got back from Peru? And did you have ayahuasca?
Oh, yeah, I went and did both, yeah. The retreat.
Well, would it be interesting to have you and Barbara and Leanne Vanier, who gave a fabulously detailed report of her 2 weeks.
I have a meeting with her when she gets back in Italy.
Oh, good.
To talk about it.
Please tell her I strongly recommend that you see the taping of her talk.
I would love to see it.
I think, I don't remember if she was speaking to IONS or INEX.
This was a couple years ago, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was
I was
incredible.
there. Yeah, it was a great talk. I liked it a lot.
And she felt it was a very positive experience. And it was, she went because she had an experience with a somewhat problematic shaman here in Austin. And
Yes, and I've also had several experiences with that problematic shaman. And that's a whole nother story. You know? He's not refined enough, he's not advanced enough to be dispensing ayahuasca. That's my opinion. But nonetheless, he was able to make good, strong ayahuasca. It's just that he was not able to provide the proper
the
guidance.
spiritual guidance. but
And his ego got in the way. His ego was the big problem, the huge elephant in the room.
Well, he wasn't disconnected enough to be in harmony with the divine, apparently.
He was not.
It's hard to exist that way.
Well, becoming an ayahuasquero is a lifelong proposition. That's why there aren't any really young ayahuasqueros. There are not very many. Because it takes a lifetime of committed work and a lot of ayahuasca and a lot of dieting with the other plants. You have to commit yourself totally. He hadn't done it. He thought he had. That's the ego problem. The ego is our biggest enemy. It gets in the way of our spiritual path because we keep thinking that we've gotten there, right? Every breakthrough we have, the ego wants to take ownership of it. And now the ego is the problem. You know, speaking for myself, I don't want to talk about you, I'm talking about me. It's true. All right, onward. So yes, clysters were commonly used, and the clyster would, of course, get you around the taste, which is truly nasty. It's worse than peyote, and peyote was pretty nasty. Eating raw peyote, or in the various ways that we took it, peyote was hard to take. These alkaloids are very, very bitter. So onward. Okay, back to the state art. Here is the darkness jar. This is the rain god. He's got the darkness jar around, suspended as a pendant around his neck. This is one of the baby Jaguar scenes, and this is a panel from Palenque. This is a lord who now is going through apotheosis. He is rising out of the underworld, dancing up out of the underworld, holding a darkness jar, and he's being greeted on the other side by his parents who are deceased. He's carrying the darkness jar, I think, is symbolic of the continuity of the lineage. That is the creation darkness. This is the kind of the mystery process by which life is created, new life is created, and the lineage is perpetuated.
And the great round of the mandala, which was Jungian inspired, you have to surrender into the darkness to release your old earthly limitations and live in a passage with the divine in order to get your next calling or your next chapter of life.
Which is the creation.
Which and we can be recreated again and again.
That's it. I think the Maya have tapped into that same deep and universal mystery. I don't just think, I'm convinced, I'm certain.
The Jungian analyst who spoke here in Austin for the Jung Society, Dr. David Rosen, said that there are those who choose egocide instead of suicide, that they understand the release of the old limitation but it's a very dangerous transition period. If you're going to surrender and release your old perception of reality before your new perception of reality, the next chapter of your earthly walk is to unfold before you.
I think it's certainly one of the most difficult tasks of my life. Is to you have to spiritualize the ego. It's not just kill it.
Exactly.
But you have to spiritualize the ego. And the ego is resistant. And it's cagey. And the ego is crafty and cagey. It wants to appropriate all the gains you make and egoize them. You know, fill you with pride about, oh, I'm so spiritual. And you have to somehow tame it, you know, and that's hard to do.
Well, the surrender to the divine, I think, is probably the most difficult.
Yes, it is. And you can do it for a moment or a day, you know, and you take, you know, it's psychedelic, and you get taken there. You have no choice, but to surrender to the divine. But then what do you do afterwards? How do you integrate it? That's so hard to do.
Well, Barbara, what you've shown time and again here is it's the old man who offers her the cup.
That's right.
It has to be the old one with the experience, and that it looks like she's birthing the new, but she's surrendering. She's taking the guidance of the old. This is such a paradox. The illustrations you found, these incredible graphics, are exact. I mean, I wish the Jungian who wrote Transforming Depression. And he interviewed 10 people who had committed or attempted suicide by jumping off the Golden Gate Bridge when he was in training in San Francisco. And all of those 10 that he interviewed that lived said, there must be a reason for me to be here, or I would not have survived my death leap. And if I can call it iconography, the graphics here, that you have chosen show that we must turn to the wise one, even as we anticipate the new to be guided, I think, is what, based on what Leanne said in her lecture about she felt so safe with the mountain people that she went to. Was it Peru or that she went to?
She did go to Peru. I don't remember the name.
I think, and she went to a certain family. Did you go to the same place?
I don't know that we went to the same place, but she didn't mention the name of the outfit she did.
But she was wise enough and intuitive enough to realize the shaman here misguided her. She saw the limitations of his youth.
Well,
went beyond that to this family. It's known to be dependable and it's in a certain enclave and it's out in the forest and it's near the river and you do all these things to guide you. The guidance of this particular family that's still practicing. Maybe that's where you went, Barbara. I don't know, but
a different place, but yes. No, it's not only the setting, but it's the fact this is an unbroken tradition, that the wisdom that these people are capable of transmitting in ceremony, they have acquired it through many, hundreds of generations.
yes.
And it's an ancient knowledge that there's an intimacy with the forest that's just astonishing. I've come to believe now, and I can be out in my own garden. The plant kingdom is conscious. The
Yes.
plant kingdom is conscious. The plant kingdom on some level is calling the shots. Even as we humans are destroying it, or trying to, you know, I mean, a lot of our actions are destroying it, are damaging it.
There's just too many of them.
Plant kingdom has its own agenda. It does. It has an agenda for us. And that these substances, these power plants, are part of its agenda. You know, to bring us back into harmony with the earth, and they're just going to give us, here's a straight shot to what it's all about. Guys, the plants have it. Plants have it, and we need it. But the ayahuasqueros have had that connection to the plants all along. They say that the plants themselves have told them which plants are good for what. You know, I think that from the Western scientific mind, we want to say, well, how do they figure out the pharmaceutical properties of all these plants? They must have just experimented, you know, trial and error, and some of these plants, some of these people died from taking the wrong thing, and other people, you know, discovered that it actually helped to cure this. But you think about how much trial and error would be required to accrue this database. And it makes more sense to me that when they say the plants told us, that that's probably true. If they're in the
If
right
we have the-
frame of mind, the
Yeah.
plants speak to us. They do, they speak to us. But not in words, they take us into themselves. They make us surrender to their agenda. That's what they do. Ayahuasca does that.
I have a quote for you. When Jung was interviewed near the end of his life for BBC, because he could speak enough English, I believe the interviewer was Freeman. The Jung Society will know the lecture, but near the end of his life,
I've seen that.
and you remember the quote at the end? When he said, Jung, what is, in all your life work, what do you think is the most important thing you learned? He said, to live in harmony with nature. That's the most important thing that he lived in his whole life. That he
It's so
learned.
true. It is the, you know, as a species on this planet, it is the right way for us. And we're so bad at it right now. We
Oh,
are
my
so
gracious.
screwed up.
Well, the biggest denial is overpopulation. If the biggest denial is not climate change, it's overpopulation.
Of course.
And the destruction of the Earth's resources and the oceans. This is
Yes, and it seems inevitable, I mean, to get off onto that topic for not very long, that nature is going to strike back, one way or another. One way or another, it seems as though we're destined to get a serious whack from nature and be depopulated.
And I think we are.
You know, it's
You've
only a matter
talked
of,
about that for years.
only a matter of time and the question of how.
You've talked about that, about how we're going to have to be righted in ways that are going to be so horrendous that we don't see it coming.
Well, we won't see it coming until after it happens, and then those of us who
Well,
survive.
there's some that do see it coming, I think.
Yeah, well, they
And
probably
do we listen to them?
Well, people do see it coming. I don't know whether someone sees exactly how it's going to happen.
Well, we become victims of our own inventions. And we keep coming up with stuff that has built-in problems that manifest sometime after we start using it and are pretty well tied into the use of this equipment, or we were dependent upon it. And I already see it coming in with equipment and lights and one thing or another that has radiation associated with it, and it's being advertised for people to use these kind of things. That's not good for you. Neither are cell phones and a lot of other things, because they put out a radiation that's bad for you if you're not careful with how you use it. And people aren't careful, and therefore they're starting to have problems with it, long-range problems.
People
It
are
takes a
addicted to
while.
cell phones. I mean, apart from the fact that you know, it's suspected to cause brain cancer, people are addicted to cell phones.
Oh, yeah,
You know, everywhere you go, somebody's just, you know,
There are a lot of
got-
problems that people can't get close to them. And there's that old story now, I love to tell the people, about I was at a conference and some friends came up to me, the fellow running the conference came up with his friend Joe and says, they were both top flight people in dentistry, and they said, Jim says, we know you've been working with electromagnetics, and you know a lot about strange maladies that come about by using these things, and people don't know what the hell they're doing. And it says, we had this problem in our dentistry work with young ladies coming in between the age of 10 and 20, and their jaws are disintegrating. It says, you study all this weird stuff with electromagnetics, and we said, we don't know what it is. Can you tell us what it is? I said, damn right, they're sleeping on their iPhones, there's no doubt about it. Go see Becker's work of 1988 in the electric man. It talks all about creating new bone from certain frequencies and destroying it with other frequencies. Hell, it's been around since '88. Go read the book about it and stay off of your iPhone.
Can't you imagine young pubescent girls sleeping on their cell phones,
Oh, gee,
just
they're
falling
afraid.
asleep?
Sure, of course, they do, because they can't put the thing down.
Yeah, don't.
At the age of, well, they just fall asleep on them and they've snuck them in,
Right.
and it's at the age of bone growth and the jaws are getting the destructive vibration instead of the vibration that's used for bone knitting. They use EMF of vibration for the bone knitting, for instance, in horses, valuable horses' legs.
There you go.
And the wrong vibration will destroy. Yeah, Barbara, it was mastoid bone.
And I'll just mention kind of on that topic that I finally got around to getting, got rid of my smart meter and just went back to the old
Hooray.
style. Because, my bedroom is right next door to that thing, and I was starting to have problems.
People are starting to move out.
Affecting sleep.
Move out the
Affecting
country.
sleep, I think it's caused tinnitus, which I still have.
Wait till they put in the 5G, finish putting in the 5G
Lord.
systems here in Austin.
It's
That's gonna be
here.
even worse.
He snuck it into us.
Yeah, oh yeah.
When you said the God of lightning is a part of creation and destruction, it was in the very early building your story here for us, the importance of the God of lightning, and the Yaqui myth of Southwestern America. Jim knew a shaman artist, David Paladin, and he talked about the creation myths of the Southwest. And I was looking for a rainbow, but I don't think it's possible with the colors they use. But the bringing together of the lightning in the rainstorm, the result is the rainbow. And they saw the rainbow as the bridge to higher consciousness, or the connection to the deity. In other words, if you have the faith through the storm, if you can keep faith through your storms of your life, your reward will be, you've made it through the storm and you get to see the rainbow. And of course, in the myth in Ireland, the reward is the pot of gold at the end of the rainbow.
Right.
But the Yaquis say the reward at the end of the rainbow is higher consciousness, that it is the bridge between heaven and earth, the divine and the earthly. That's what they call the rainbow.
I can't see much difference between a higher consciousness and a pot of gold myself.
No?
It depends on how you
One of the names
invest
of the
it.
moon, one of the names of the Maya moon goddess is Ishchel, which is she of the rainbow.
Really? Oh, she's Isis in ancient Greece. And a spider woman in Paladin's tribe, in Canyon de Chelly, the Pueblo Indians, the spider comes down from the tree after the rainbow appears at the end of the rain, and the spider comes down from the rainbow in Africa. See, these are early symbols of nature
Absolutely.
that, and when we are still in harmony with nature, we're still connected, we experience nature differently.
Yes.
And two of the most sacred sites in the Southwest are the Rainbow Bridges, which are seen as bridges to the divine, sacred places, sacred visions, quest sites.
I'm going to take a quick break here because Joe's out, and I would like to make a quick pit stop.
We'll save your seat for.
We got more to go. But
Okay.
and I don't want to start without Joe. So
We're at 5:30 right now.
do we need to leave at some point?
No, but we have advertised as 3 to 5, so just wanted to
Okay.
let
Well,
everybody know.
we'll see. We've gotten through 2:30 today.
All right.
quite fascinating.
It is fascinating.
We're talking about, let me back up one slide. We're talking about the darkness jar. I didn't quite spell it right there. A darkness jar which is worn by the rain god as an inverted pendant around his neck, but then carried by this king of Palenque, who after death rises up out of the underworld, greeted by his parents. And he's carrying the darkness jar along with a snake. And the snake, you know, is a bit of a mystery. It's like, what is it doing there? And I don't know that I really have the answer. I don't want to just jump and say, well, it's obviously the snake that the old god comes out of, because it doesn't look like that snake. But the other thing is that he's holding an axe, the handle of which is made out of a snake that's doubled over. I don't know where you can see it, but there's the tail of the snake right there, and there's the head. There's the head of the snake. So there's some kind of a connection there, and he's also dressed as the rain god. He's dressed as the same rain god that we see over here in the baby jaguar scenes. So it's clear that his apotheosis is tied into the actions of the rain god, as though here he is in the afterlife, in the other world, acting as the rain god, carrying the jug of darkness, fundamental to procreation. All right, onward. Here are a couple of pottery scenes that involve jars. These, in fact, are darkness jars. You can't see them really well. They're being carried in association with a dance, a kind of trance dance involving bees. This guy has bees painted on his robe, and these guys are carrying bees. It probably has to do with the fermentation of the honey that they would use as a base for the admixtures for these substances they're drinking. And then over here you see someone who's truly inebriated here. And you see just jars all over the place, you know, jar here, jar down here, in these scenes. And you know, people have supposed that maybe it's just alcohol. And it's possible that it was just alcohol sometimes, but there's no reason to assume they didn't put other things in the alcohol. So moving on now, we're going to talk about what these plants might have been. So if you remember, I pointed out in a couple of scenes that the snake lady is always wearing a skirt, and it always has the same kind of an appearance. It's made out of a leaf. If you look carefully, you see the central vein of the leaf and then the tributary veins. And so I've colored it green here to make it a little more apparent. But in every case, she's wearing this leaf skirt. This is just, again, more evidence that she is the personification of a plant, in addition to being a wood goddess. So what plant could it be? Let's back up. Take a look at that leaf. Now, it's not going to be botanically accurate, unfortunately. But in terms of the way that the Maya represented certain plants, I think we can rule out tobacco. They consistently represented tobacco like this. It always had 3 little circles at the end of the leaf. And I'm only showing you a couple of examples, but there are lots of places where tobacco is represented, and they always show these 3 little circles, which I think represent the tobacco flowers that are always, when you take pictures or look at tobacco plants, the flowers are very obvious. And if you're representing it iconographically, you show the flowers as those little circles. So these are images of tobacco in Maya art. And we've been told in this case that this little bottle is the house of tobacco, probably a snuff jar. And you see the little handles on it. This allowed you to wear it as a pendant around your neck and keep your snuff in there. So I say this plant, the plant that she represents is not tobacco. All right? What could it be? This is one possibility. The datura leaf is actually, not a bad simulation of that leaf.
It's growing wild down in Wimberley.
Well, I've
Found
got-
some last week.
I've got it growing a lot. I've got a huge datura patch in my backyard. I had no idea it would be so prolific, but the other night I had 20 blooms all at once.
Wow.
That was right after we got that first heavy rain. And it started just popping out flower buds like crazy. And I went out and I counted them, and there were like 80 of them. And so now I get 7 or 8 every night. And they look just like this. This is when they're opening, and this is when they're open. And they have this wonderful fragrance. And so here's tobacco. I think it is not tobacco, just because the Maya had this characteristic way of representing tobacco, and they were consistent about it. I think that the other possibilities, I think this is my best candidate.
Yeah.
All right, and look at that. Does anyone happen to know what the components of ayahuasca are? There are 2 plants that are used to make it. One is called Kapi, or Yahe. Banisteriopsis Kapi is its generic name. Banisteriopsis is the same genus as this plant that I've just showed you.
Oh.
Right here, Banisteriopsis. This is Banisteriopsis muricata. This plant, and this is something that's not well known, is native to Chiapas, southern Mexico.
Wow.
It's native to the Amazon as well, but this particular one extends all the way up through Central America, wherever there are pockets of high canopy rainforest and adequate rain, all the way up into southern Mexico, Chiapas in particular. It's actually the coast of Chiapas. That plant is known to contain the same alkaloids as Banisteriopsis capri. It's harmine and harmaline. And the Mimosa hostilis is found throughout the Americas, both continents, and it contains DMT. So the other plant that's in ayahuasca is called chapruna, and it contains DMT. And so to make the brew of ayahuasca, they mix together in certain ratios the leaves of, or actually not the leaves of the chapruna together with the stem of the vine of ayahuasca. It's the woody climbing stem of the ayahuasca vine that they use. They pound it up into just fibers, and they boil it together with the leaves of the chapruna. Here you have the same ingredients. You have another plant in the same genus with the same chemicals in it, and another plant which contained DMT, and both of these were readily available to the classic Maya. And I'm thinking that, why not? And so, Mayahuasca. But it may well have had datura in it, or datura might well have been another plant that they used, because if you look here, this is a suggestion, I think a very good one, by Justin Kerr, the photographer who's made all these real-life photographs and who owns this online database. That this, in fact, this diadem that's sitting up here on the crown of this serpent is a datura leaf in profile. I think it's a very good argument. He's written a paper about it as well. He's made a very good case, and I buy it.
What is it, the leaf that's psychoactive in datura?
I think all parts of the plant contain it, but I think the root contains the most.
The root, yeah.
But the flowers are actually used to make a psychotropic tea. There are a number of different recipes for consumption of datura, and they're all you have to do all of them very, very carefully, because it's easy to overdose. I've never done datura. I've been afraid to. I mean, really, I grow it. I have easy access to it, but
It's beautiful.
I'm not inclined to try it. I might try it if I had access to a tradition of its use around elders that knew and could, advise and counsel and protect and support. I might try it under those circumstances, but I don't know where to go for that.
Jim just offered to plant some for you at Deer Creek.
My plants are producing seeds like crazy. By November or so, I'm gonna have thousands of datura seeds, if anybody wants them.
If you have any little plantings, they have whole hedges of it in New Orleans. I bet you it was part of voodoo in New Orleans.
Very likely.
They're whole hedges.
Very
I've walked through
likely.
neighborhoods, it's beautiful, you know, you walk for half a block.
Oh, I
it's
know
all
that.
Datura bush. In
Oh,
blue, it's
gorgeous.
beautiful.
So the point being that I think Datura was
Jim Beal
involved.
told me what it was, I just thought it was a pretty flower. He said, well,
It only blooms at night, so it must have been pollinated by night insects, traditionally. And I'm not sure right now who, I go out and hand pollinate it myself. I go around and I'll gently stroke the stamens and pistils of each blossom, go around and exchange between one blossom and another. And however many blossoms there are, if I can get to them, there's some that are hard to get to, because the patch is so big, but I'll try to cross-fertilize them. I want them all to be viable, produce viable seeds, and I'm gonna share those around. So I think this conjuring scene, which was a public monument in Yaxchilan, Maya city on the Usumacinta River, where she's, we know what she did, right? She perforated her tongue with a rope, thorny rope, and then burnt the bloody bark paper in this bowl, and out of the smoke of the bark paper, burning bark paper, comes this conjured serpent. And she's a living person. We know she was a historical figure, but she is stepping into the role of the moon goddess, conjuring an ancestor of her lineage.
She was a real person.
She was a real person, right?
Who lived when?
She lived in the 7th century
Wow.
at Yaxchilan. And this serpent's got this motif that looks very much like a datura flower. So she's probably taken datura. Here you get another conjuring scene right here. In this case, 2 people involved in it. And in this case, this particular text tells us that what's coming out of the open maw of the serpent is the newborn son of the lineage, because it's his birthday. So it's not this warrior ancestor. This is the Nahual. This is the spirit. This is the Maya believed that every lineage had its own repository of creation, darkness, power, and this power resided in sacred mountains that belonged to the lineage, and that it could be conjured in the form of a being who represented either an ancestor or a newborn child. I mean, this is kind of the deepest mystery that I know of in the Maya tradition, and it's very shamanistic, you know. And they conjured the spirit of a newborn child on his birthday because it's not sufficient for him to be born in flesh. The spirit of the lineage has to be brought into in this way. So its ritual is done on the day of his birth.
Well, I wish Carlos Cedillo was here, who went to the Guatemala to study the tradition. Do you know him?
I do know him. I've met him.
Okay.
Well, I've met him at several IONS functions,
Oh,
and
good.
yeah, we've talked on several occasions. And then here's, this is the snake lady scene. This is the one we've already seen. So this is the moon goddess in her snake lady conjuring form with her leaf skirt, conjuring the old god who comes out of the serpent maw. And this is the state level expression of that same practice. All right, onward, more of the Akab or darkness jar. Some more examples of the darkness jar. There's lots and lots of evidence of it. This is the one we saw earlier. This is the one we saw with the maize god being born out of the seed, is being watered by the stuff in the darkness jar. Here's the rain god dancing with his darkness jar pendant. Here's a death god carrying a darkness jar along with a human head. And then here is, this is the Akan god, the god of the transitions, carrying a jar with bees attached to it. And then here's, one of these underworld characters in a dance, carrying it on a little handle. So the darkness jar is a part of this deep mystery, and I may give you the impression that I understand this stuff, right? And some of it I do understand pretty well. But there's some of this stuff, I honestly say that for all that I am saying about it, there's a level on which I don't understand, and I'm not sure that any of us does.
I'm not sure you're supposed to.
I don't know if we're supposed to or not. That I don't know. All right, so again, here's the state level practice. practice, the representation of creation darkness. Here it is in this scene with the old god meeting the Lord with his jug. This is the motif in her bloodletting bowl, right there. So this act of blood sacrifice is also creation darkness. It's a continuous cycle of giving blood, making blood offerings to perpetuate the necessary reciprocity for the sustaining, creation and sustaining of the lineage. Alrighty. Now, the tree. And again, this tree is fundamental to the whole Maya creation myth. It's the tree which grows out of the mountain at the time that the baby jaguar is offered. And the tree, in my understanding, and in this paper that I've it's in press now, the book isn't published yet, but I draw upon a detailed quote from Jung about the axis mundi. I'm really glad I had a nice venue in which to insert some of Jung's favorite writings about the axis mundi, that the axis mundi is not just the tree, it's the source of life, of all beings, and for the Maya, all the beings that inhabit the tree, that all of the elements of the forest that sustain humans. You know, it's all of the animals that live in the forest, it's all of the birds that live in the trees, it's the plant materials, it's all of the small plants that are sheltered underneath the canopy, and it's all of the medicinal herbs. All of the medicinal herbs are products of the forest. Like everything that the Maya had, particularly before agriculture, came straight from the forest. And so for them, the axis mundi, the tree, was the central source of their relationship to nature. And this is part of what had to be perpetuated in this cycle of reciprocity. And the ancestors themselves were depicted as trees in the afterlife, that they arise from the earth. This is a band, this register is as earth symbols, and you probably might be familiar with the sarcophagus down in the basement of the temple at Palenque, a secret stairway that was found in the 50s that led down to this vaulted chamber that contained the stone sarcophagus and the skeleton of the most famous king of Palenque named Pakal. The sides of the sarcophagus are inscribed with representations of all of the ancestors of his lineage, and they're all named. These are named ancestors of the lineage, and they're represented as trees, different kinds of trees rising out of the earth. So the whole process of reciprocity with the gods also sustains the ancestors. And then this is something I just found recently. It was on a site a Facebook site created by modern Yucatec Maya. And someone painted this amongst their community, showing the axis mundi, the celestial and the underworld realms, and where all different deities are placed on it. You can't really see the details here, but I just wanted to show you the image and tell you where I got it. And then finally, this is something that I put together, just as kind of my understanding of what that axis mundi is for the Maya. The underworld here, down in the caves, with the middle world and the celestial world. It's all part of, it's the column that connects the heavens, the earth, and the underworld. And then all of the beings and denizens of the forest.
That's beautiful.
Thank you.
And there's one of those parrots.
This is a macaw. Oops, here, let me move on. This is a lovely cotinga. It's a beautiful, like blue and purple bird. This is a quetzal, a bird with a long, very delicate feathers. And then this is a macaw, the scarlet macaw. And then there's other creatures. There's different trees. There's a kinkajou here. And then there are, there's a water bird down here. I just put all this together. It didn't take very long, but I thought, and this is of course, this is the ceiba tree the saber tree, which is the great central, what they call the Yashche, or first tree of the Maya. This is the actual tree, specific genus, silk cotton or kapok tree. And it's very, very tall before it has branches. And so when you see a saber tree in the forest, it actually looks like a giant. A tall trunk, and then finally the first branches stand straight out like a human arm, human arms. And finally, again, the symbol of the maize god being resurrected out of the seed, the turtle shell, which is the earth. Out of the turtle shell as well is born the toad. This is the old god in the form of the toad. And this is the tree. This is just another way of representing this fundamental constellation. The turtle shell is the seed, the skull. The skull is the source of regeneration. It's like regenerative bone. And out of it rises the newly born maize god. And it's being watered by the Akab jar and the hero twins. These are the hero twins of the Popol Vuh. Hunahbu and Shpalanke in their classic Maya forms. And then finally, we get back to the story itself, and Hukpulsi, the name of the baby jaguar and of the old god, translates as seventh provider of sustenance. And a lot of Maya gods have numbers in front of their names, like 1 death and 7 death, and 1 blowgunner and 7 blowgunner in the Popol Vuh. And in this case, his name was seventh provider of sustenance and the first snake. Seventh provider of sustenance is the name of the old god, and Yashkan names his servant. And finally, back to the state level art and iconography, the drum major headdress with this sustenance hieroglyph attached to it. This is the kind of sustenance that scene refers to. Before agriculture, it was the sustenance of the forest and the sustenance of the seas and the rivers. And this is one of the emblems of war, and this is the other emblem of war being handed to this young king right after his accession by his deceased parents. The message being that in order to perpetuate the cycle of reciprocity with the gods, you have the obligation of blood sacrifice. You have to bring in captives for blood sacrifice, and you have to sacrifice your own blood.
These plaques were buried under the temple of Palenque.
These were on public display.
I know, but I said, I'm familiar with the temple of Palenque. My mother was one of the first people in it, first women in it. And of course, there was that burial underneath the temple.
Exactly, that's the sarcophagus, right?
Yeah, right. And
I
I
showed
was
you
wondering if that
She was,
from the sarcophagus.
Yeah, we go
she
jump.
went in 41 when it was still under jungle vines before they were pulled back.
That would have been right after it was discovered. The
Yeah, she went
sarcophagus,
early in
the sarcophagus itself has these. These are the ancestors that are carved around the sides of the sarcophagus.
Oh, okay, right. I was wondering where
And
they were.
they're being depicted as ancestors. The ancestors are being depicted as trees rising out of the earth. So it's this whole, the whole cycle of reciprocity, but the obligation to conduct war was part of it. And again, some other just, getting down kind of down toward the end here, so many different ways that they represented scene or sustenance. These are the little bundled gods that you saw sitting on the dais, and they have this same emblem on their own headdresses, the little Piscean jester god. And then finally, the word itself in the Mayan languages, I've reconstructed it here for the Cholan language, sustenance. And that is it.
Wow.
So Barb,
Ooh, what a trip.